feeling like quitting everything. When your English won't improve, your confidence keeps shrinking, and life in America feels cold, fast, and unfamiliar, can break you in ways no one sees. But what if those quiet struggles, awkward words, and an unexpected love story slowly turned into a life you never imagined? One small, real step at a time? Life changed without warning. You don't usually notice the exact moment your life starts to change. It doesn't come with music or a dramatic scene like in movies. It's quieter than that. Almost invisible. One normal day, you wake up, look at your phone, maybe scroll a little too long, and suddenly there's this heavy thought sitting in your chest. I don't think I can do this anymore. That was me. And if you're here watching this, maybe it's you too. Back then, I was living in the United States, but honestly, it didn't feel like I was living. It felt more like I was surviving inside a world that moved too fast for me. People spoke quickly, smiled politely, and then disappeared into their own busy lives. Meanwhile, I stood there trying to understand simple sentences that somehow felt like puzzles with missing pieces. My English wasn't zero, but it wasn't enough. And not enough is a dangerous place to be, because it tricks your brain. There's a psychological concept called the competence gap. It's when you know just enough to realize how much you don't know. And instead of motivating you, it slowly eats away at your confidence. Your brain starts whispering things like, "Why even try? You'll just sound stupid." And over time, that whisper becomes a belief. So I stopped trying. Not completely. I still went outside. I still worked. I still said hello and thank you. But the real conversations, the ones that connect people, I avoided them like they were dangerous. You ever notice how silence can feel safe at first, but then it grows and grows until it becomes a wall between you and everything you wanted when you first arrived? That was the moment I didn't expect. Not the big life change. Not the move to America. But the quiet decision to slowly disappear inside my own life. And the strangest part? No one noticed. Because from the outside, everything looked fine. I had a job. I had a place to live. I was doing what many people dream of. Living in the U.S. Building a future. But inside, I felt like I was losing something I couldn't name. Maybe it was my voice. Or maybe it was my courage. There's something people don't tell you about starting over in a new country. It's not just about learning a language. It's about rebuilding your identity. Back home, you know how to be funny, how to be smart, how to be yourself. But here, you become quiet, careful, slower. It's like your personality is stuck behind a door, and the key is words you don't fully have yet. So you wait. And while you wait, life keeps moving. Here's the thing most people misunderstand about learning English, or honestly, anything difficult. They think it's about effort. Study more. Practice more. Push harder. But when you're tired, when you feel small, when your confidence is already broken, effort feels impossible. Your brain isn't lazy. It's protecting you. There's actual science behind this. When your brain senses repeated failure or embarrassment, it activates avoidance behavior. It tries to keep you away from situations that might hurt your self-image. So every time you avoid speaking, your brain goes, "Good job. You're safe." Safe but stuck. And I stayed stuck for longer than I want to admit. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. I remember one specific moment. I was standing in line at a grocery store. The cashier asked me something simple. I think it was about a membership card or a discount. And I froze. Completely blank. Not because I didn't know English, but because my brain panicked. I smiled awkwardly, said, "No, thank you," even though I wasn't sure what I was saying no to. And then I walked out holding my bag, feeling small. It wasn't about the question. It was about what it represented. Every small moment like that becomes evidence in your mind. Evidence that you're not ready, not good enough, not like everyone else. And slowly, you start believing it. So yeah, I wanted to quit. Not just English. Everything. The dream. The effort. The idea that I could build a life here. But here's where life does something interesting. Something almost unfair at first. It doesn't give you a big solution. It gives you a tiny moment. A moment so small you could ignore it. And I almost did. Because when you're used to feeling stuck, you don't expect change to come quietly. You think it has to be big, dramatic, obvious. But real change? It whispers. Looking back, I can see it clearly now. That period of silence, of frustration, of wanting to give up. It wasn't the end. It was the setup. Life was preparing something. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And here's the part one want you to really hear, not as motivation, not as a cliche, but as something grounded in reality. You don't need to feel ready to keep going. You don't need confidence to take the next step. You just need to not quit today. That's it. Because the version of you that finally speaks, connects, loves, builds a family, and feels at home, that version isn't created in one big moment. It's built quietly, in days where nothing seems to change, in moments where you feel like you're failing, in situations that feel awkward and uncomfortable, and sometimes in a completely unexpected meeting that you didn't plan. That's exactly what happened to me. Not in a classroom, not in a perfect situation, but in a random, ordinary moment that didn't look important at all. And somehow it changed everything. My first shock in America. Air hits differently when you land in a new country. Not just temperature, something else. Something sharper. Like the world is moving at a speed your mind hasn't agreed to yet. I remember stepping outside for the first time in the United States and thinking, this is it. Not in an excited way. More like a quiet realization that there was no going back to the version of me who felt comfortable. It wasn't dramatic. No music. No big moment. Just cold air, unfamiliar sounds, and a strange silence inside me. You'd think the biggest shock would be the language. But honestly, it was everything else wrapped around it. The weather, for example. Back where I came from, the air felt alive, warm, humid, familiar. But here, it felt distant, controlled, sometimes too cold, sometimes too dry. It sounds small, but your body notices. And when your body feels uncomfortable, your brain becomes more alert, more anxious. That's not just a feeling. It's biology. When your environment changes suddenly, your brain enters what psychologists call a heightened awareness state. It scans for danger. It tries to predict what's coming next. But when everything is unfamiliar, language, culture, even the way people walk, it can't predict anything. So it stays on edge. And when your brain is on edge, learning becomes harder. That's something I didn't understand at the time. I thought I just needed to try harder with English. But every time I stepped outside, my mind was already tired before I even spoke a word. Then came the cultural differences. In U.S., people are polite, but distant. They smile, say, "How are you?" and keep walking. The first time someone asked me that, I paused. I thought it was a real question. I started thinking about how I actually felt. But they were already gone. It sounds funny now. But in that moment it felt confusing, even a little lonely. Because back home, when someone asks you how you are, they stay. They listen. There's warmth. Here, everything felt efficient. Fast. Like conversations had a time limit. And I didn't know how to fit into that rhythm. So, I observed. A lot. I watched how people ordered coffee. How they greeted each other. How they stood in line without talking. How they used small talk like a tool, not a connection. And here's the strange part. Observing helped, but it also made me more aware of how different I was. That awareness? It can either push you forward or freeze you. For me, at the beginning, it froze me because every difference felt like a mistake waiting to happen. Even simple things became stressful. Buying groceries wasn't just buying groceries. It was a performance. You had to understand questions, respond quickly, use the right tone. And if you didn't, you felt it immediately, that small shift in energy, that moment of confusion. Not judgment, just misalignment. And your brain notices that. There's a concept in psychology called social friction. It's the tiny discomfort you feel when interactions don't flow naturally. In your home country, social friction is low. Everything feels smooth, automatic. But in a new culture, friction is everywhere. And too much friction makes you avoid interaction altogether. That's exactly what I started doing. I chose self-checkout over talking to cashiers. I nodded instead of asking questions. I smiled instead of expressing confusion. From the outside, it looked like I was adapting. But inside, I was slowly disconnecting. Because real adaptation isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about moving through them. And I wasn't doing that yet. There was also something else I didn't expect, the rules. Not just laws, but invisible rules. Like how people value personal space. How neighbors don't randomly visit. How everything is scheduled, planned, structured. Back home, life felt more spontaneous. Here it felt organized to the point where I didn't know where I fit in. Even relationships seemed different. People didn't open up quickly. Trust took time. And without strong English, building that trust felt almost impossible. So days became routines. Wake up, go to work, come home, repeat. No deep conversations. No real connections. Just movement without meaning. And that's when something interesting happened. My motivation started to fade, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't feel progress. And when humans don't feel progress, they lose energy. There's research showing that the brain releases dopamine, not just when you succeed, but when you see improvement. Small wins matter. They signal to your brain that effort is worth it. But in my case, everything felt the same. Every day, I was still confused, still quiet, still unsure. So my brain started asking a dangerous question. What's the point? That question doesn't sound dramatic, but it's powerful. Because once it enters your mind, it changes how you see everything. You stop looking for opportunities. You start looking for exits. I didn't book more classes. I didn't try new conversations. I stayed in what felt safe, even if it wasn't helping me grow. And here's the truth most people won't say out loud. Sometimes, living in America doesn't feel like a dream. Sometimes it feels like pressure. Pressure to succeed. Pressure to adapt. Pressure to become someone new faster than you're ready for. And if you don't talk about that honestly, you start thinking you're the only one struggling. But you're not. I wasn't. I just didn't know it yet. Because everything was about to shift. Not because I suddenly became confident. Not because my English improved overnight. But because of something much simpler. A moment. A random, ordinary moment that didn't follow any plan. It didn't look like a solution. It didn't feel important. But it broke the pattern I was stuck in. And for the first time since arriving in the U.S., something inside me moved forward. Not fast. Not perfectly. But enough to change direction. And that's all it takes sometimes. Just a slight shift. Because once your direction changes, your entire story starts to change with it. And mine? Mine started with a moment I almost ignored. I chose silence. Too long silence doesn't feel dangerous at first. It feels smart, safe, controlled. You tell yourself, I'll speak when I'm ready. You think you're being patient. But what if waiting to be ready is the very thing keeping you stuck? That's the trap I fell into. After those first overwhelming weeks in the United States, I made a quiet decision. Not out loud, not consciously, but it showed up in my actions every single day. I stopped trying to speak unless I absolutely had to. At work, I kept my sentences short.
Yes. No.
Okay. At stores, I avoided eye contact. In conversations, I nodded more than I talked. It looked like I was adjusting. But in reality, I was shrinking. And the strange thing is, no one tells you when this starts happening. There's no alarm, no warning, just a slow shift where your world becomes smaller, not because the world changed, but because you stopped reaching for it. There's something powerful happening in your brain when you choose silence repeatedly. It's called reinforcement learning. Every time you avoid speaking and nothing bad happens, your brain rewards you. It says, good choice. You avoided risk. And because your brain is designed to protect you, it remembers that pattern. So next time, you avoid again and again until silence becomes your default setting. That's exactly where I ended up. I remember sitting in a break room one day. A few coworkers were talking, laughing, sharing stories. I understood maybe 60% of what they were saying. Enough to follow the conversation, but not enough to jump in confidently. And I had something to say. A simple story. A small comment. But I didn't say it because my brain started doing what it does best. Overthinking. What if I say it wrong? What if they don't understand me? What if it gets awkward? So I stayed quiet. And the conversation moved on without me. That moment lasted maybe 20 seconds. But it stayed in my mind for hours. Because deep down I knew something important. It wasn't my English holding me back. It was my fear of being seen trying. And that fear? It's more common than people think. There's a psychological concept called evaluation anxiety. It's the fear of being judged, especially in social situations. And when you're learning a new language, that fear becomes stronger because you feel exposed, vulnerable. Every word feels like a test. Every sentence feels like a risk. So your brain tries to protect you by saying, let's just stay quiet. It's easier.
And it is easier.
But it comes with a cost. Because every time you don't speak, you lose a chance to improve. Not just your language, but your connection with people. And humans are wired for connection. When you don't feel connected, something inside you starts to fade. I didn't notice it immediately. But over time, I felt more distant. Not just from others, but from myself. I wasn't expressing my thoughts, my humor, my personality. I became flat. And that's a strange feeling, to know you have more inside you, but you can't show it. It's like being in a room with your own voice, but the door is locked. There was one night that made everything clearer. I was on the phone with someone from back home. We were talking, laughing, telling stories. Words flowed easily, naturally. I didn't think about grammar. I didn't hesitate. I was myself. And then the call ended. And the silence came back. Not the peaceful kind. The heavy kind. That contrast hit me hard. Because it showed me something I couldn't ignore anymore. I wasn't bad at communicating. I was just trapped in a version of myself that felt limited. And instead of breaking out of it, I was protecting it. That's when I realized something uncomfortable. Silence wasn't helping me. It was hiding me. And the longer I stayed hidden, the harder it became to come back out. There's research showing that avoidance increases anxiety over time. The more you avoid something, the bigger it feels in your mind. What starts as a small fear becomes a large barrier. That's exactly what happened with my English. Simple conversations started to feel intimidating. Phone calls felt impossible. Even introducing myself felt stressful. Not because I couldn't do it, but because I hadn't been doing it. Your brain adapts to what you practice. And I had been practicing silence, so silence became my strength and my weakness. But here's the part no one talks about enough. You don't break out of silence by suddenly becoming confident. You break it by doing something small while still feeling uncomfortable. At that time, I didn't know how to do that yet. I was still stuck in the loop, still choosing the safe option, still telling myself, tomorrow I'll try. But tomorrow kept moving, and nothing changed, until one day something different happened. Not a big event, not a life-changing opportunity,
Just a moment.
a simple interaction that didn't go the way I expected. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't choose silence. I didn't speak perfectly. I didn't sound confident, but I spoke. And that tiny decision, so small most people wouldn't even notice it, started to shift something inside me. It didn't fix everything, but it cracked the wall. And once a wall cracks, it never feels as strong again. Looking back now, I can say this clearly. The problem was never that I didn't know enough English. The problem was that I waited too long to use what I already knew. And maybe that's where you are right now. Not at zero. Just stuck between knowing and doing.
Between understanding and speaking.
Between wanting to change and actually changing. If that's you, I want you to remember this one thing. You don't need better English to start speaking. You need to start speaking to build better English. It sounds simple, but it's uncomfortable. And that's why most people don't do it. I almost didn't either. But life has a way of pushing you gently at first, then a little harder. And that next moment, it pushed me just enough. Into something unexpected. Something human. Something that didn't feel like practice but changed everything anyway. A random moment changed me. Change doesn't always arrive with confidence. Sometimes it shows up while you're still doubting yourself. That day felt completely normal. Almost forgettable. I was at a small grocery store. Not one of those big, crowded supermarkets, but a quiet place where everything felt slower. Fewer people.
Softer lights.
The kind of place where no one is in a rush, except the thoughts in your head. I wasn't planning anything. Just buying a few things I needed. Milk.
Bread.
Something simple for dinner. And honestly, I was hoping for a quick trip.
No conversations. No awkward moments. Just in, out, done.
But life doesn't always follow your plan. I was standing in the aisle, looking at different types of bread, too many choices, by the way, and trying to read the labels. Whole grain, multigrain, organic, gluten-free. Words I had seen before but never really paid attention to. And then I heard a voice. Do you know which one is actually soft? Simple question. Nothing complicated. But my brain still paused. Not because I didn't understand, but because I wasn't expecting to be part of a conversation. I turned and saw her. She looked completely relaxed, like asking a stranger a question was the most natural thing in the world. No pressure.
No judgment.
Just curiosity. And for a split second, I considered doing what I always did.
Smile. Nod.
Step away. Stay safe. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the tone of her voice. Maybe it was the quiet atmosphere. Or maybe I was just tired of being silent. So I answered. Slowly. I think this one is soft. I tried it before. Not perfect English. Not smooth. But real. And here's what surprised me. She didn't react the way I expected.
No confusión. No awkward pause.
She just smiled and said, "Oh, good. I'll try that too." That was it. No big moment. No dramatic reaction. Just a normal conversation. And somehow that made it feel bigger than anything. Because in my mind, speaking English had always felt like a performance. Something I had to do correctly.
Carefully. Precisely.
But in that moment, It was just communication.
Messy.
Simple.
Human.
We ended up talking for another minute. About bread, about cooking, about nothing important. And something shifted. Not outside. Inside. Because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like someone who was learning English. I felt like someone using it, and that difference matters more than you think. There's a concept in psychology called identity shift. It's when your behavior changes how you see yourself, not the other way around. Most people wait to feel confident before they act. But in reality, you act first and confidence follows. That tiny conversation, maybe 60 seconds long, did something I didn't expect. It gave my brain new evidence. Evidence that speaking doesn't always lead to embarrassment. Evidence that imperfect English can still work. Evidence that people are not waiting to judge you. They're just trying to understand you. And once your brain gets new evidence, it starts updating its beliefs. Slowly, quietly, but powerfully. I left the store that day with more than groceries. I left with a question in my mind. What if it's not as hard as I thought? That question might sound small, but it's dangerous in a good way. Because once you start questioning your limiting beliefs, they lose their control over you. And that's exactly what began to happen. I didn't suddenly become outgoing. I didn't start talking to everyone. But I did something different. I stopped avoiding small interactions. At the cashier, instead of just saying thank you, I added one more sentence. How is your day going? Simple, basic, but intentional. And again, nothing bad happened. The cashier smiled, answered, asked me a question back. A real conversation. Short, but real. And each of these moments started stacking, like small wins. And remember what I mentioned before, your brain needs to see progress to stay motivated. These moments, they were progress. Not perfect grammar. Not advanced vocabulary. Just participation. That's when I realized something important. Learning English in real life isn't about studying more. It's about engaging more. It's about allowing yourself to be part of the world around you, even if you're not perfect yet. Especially if you're not perfect yet. Because perfection is not the goal. Connection is. And connection doesn't require perfect sentences. It requires presence, attention, willingness. That's it. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. That same person I met in the grocery store, I saw her again. Not planned. Not intentional. Just one of those random moments life throws at you. This time, it wasn't about bread. It was a little longer. A little more personal. And a little more meaningful. At first, it still felt casual. Small talk. Simple questions. But something about the way she listened, really listened, felt different. It didn't feel rushed. It didn't feel surface level. It felt human. And for someone who had spent months feeling disconnected, that feeling was rare. Almost unfamiliar. We talked about where we were from. Why we came to the U.S. What we missed. And for the first time, I said more than just basic sentences. Not because my English suddenly improved, but because I felt safe enough to try. And that changes everything. Because when you feel safe, your brain relaxes. And when your brain relaxes, you access more of what you already know. Words come easier. Thoughts flow better. You stop overthinking every sentence. That's not magic. That's neuroscience. Your brain performs better when it's not under threat. And in that moment, I wasn't afraid. I was just talking. Looking back, it's almost funny. All that time I spent worrying about grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and the real breakthrough came from a simple conversation about bread. Life doesn't always give you what you expect, but sometimes it gives you exactly what you need, just not in the form you were looking for. That random moment, it didn't solve everything, but it opened a door, a small one, just enough for light to come through. And once you see a little light, it's hard to go back to complete darkness. What I didn't know at that time was this. That door wasn't just leading to better English. It was leading to something much deeper. Something I wasn't planning. Something I definitely wasn't ready for. But something that would slowly change my life in a way I never expected. Because sometimes the smallest conversations turn into the biggest stories. And this one, it was just getting started. Love began with broken English. Love doesn't always begin with perfect words. Sometimes it starts with sentences that are incomplete, awkward, and a little bit wrong. And somehow, that makes it more real. The second time I saw her, it didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. Not in a dramatic, movie-like way. Just familiar. Like when you hear a song twice in one day and start paying attention to it. We smiled. Not the polite, automatic smile people give strangers. A slower one. Recognizing. Comfortable. And then came the moment that used to scare me the most. Conversation. But this time, something was different. I didn't try to sound perfect. I didn't wait for the right sentence to appear in my head. I just spoke. My English not very good, I said, half laughing, half warning. She smiled again, but this time there was something warmer in it. That's okay, she said. We can go slow. That sentence? It changed everything. We can go slow. Not just in language. In connection. In understanding. In everything that came after. There's something powerful about slowing down communication. When conversations aren't rushed, your brain has time to process, respond, and relax. And when both people agree without saying it directly to slow down, something interesting happens. The pressure disappears. And when pressure disappears, authenticity shows up. We talked about simple things at first. Food. Work. The weather. Yes, the classic American small talk, but slower, softer, more intentional. Sometimes I paused to find words. Sometimes I made mistakes. Sometimes I used the wrong tense or forgot a word completely. And something surprising kept happening. She understood me anyway. That's when I realized something that no textbook ever explained clearly. People don't listen for perfect grammar. They listen for meaning. And meaning doesn't require perfection. It requires honesty. There's a concept in communication psychology called intention over accuracy. It means that when your intention is clear, people can fill in the gaps, even if your language isn't perfect. And that's exactly what was happening. I wasn't speaking like a fluent English speaker, but I was speaking like myself. And for the first time, that felt enough. Days passed. Then weeks. We started seeing each other more often. Not in a planned, structured way. Just small moments. Coffee. Walks. Quick conversations that somehow lasted longer each time. And with each interaction, something unexpected grew. Not just connection. Confidence. But not the loud, obvious kind. The quiet kind. The kind that shows up when you stop overthinking every word. The kind that builds when you realize you don't need to be perfect to be understood. I started noticing changes in myself. I asked more questions. I shared more stories. I laughed more freely, even when I didn't fully understand everything. And here's the interesting part. My English didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became alive. Because language isn't just about structure. It's about emotion, timing, energy. And those things don't come from memorizing vocabulary. They come from using the language in real, human moments. That's why learning English through real life, through conversations, through relationships, is so powerful. It activates more parts of your brain. Emotional memory, social awareness, context understanding. It's not just learning. It's experiencing. And experiences stick. There's even research showing that emotionally meaningful interactions improve language retention. Your brain remembers things better when they're connected to feelings. And trust me, I remembered every word I used with her. Not because I studied them, but because they mattered. But let's be real for a second. It wasn't always smooth. There were moments of confusion, misunderstandings, times when I said something and immediately thought, that didn't come out right. Once, I tried to tell a story about my childhood. I mixed up tenses, used the wrong words, and completely lost track of what I was saying halfway through. I stopped, embarrassed, ready to apologize. But she didn't interrupt. She waited, patiently, and then she said, "I think I understand. You felt lonely back then, right?" And she was right. Not because my English was clear, but because my feeling was. That moment stayed with me, because it taught me something deeper than language. It taught me that connection doesn't depend on perfection. It depends on effort, presence, and willingness to be seen, even when you're not at your best. And slowly, something else started to grow. Something I wasn't planning. Something I didn't expect. Feelings. Real ones. The kind that don't ask for permission. The kind that show up quietly and then suddenly feel impossible to ignore. And that's where things became complicated. Because building a connection in your native language is one thing. Building it in a language you're still learning? That's different. You can't always express everything you feel. You can't always explain your thoughts clearly. Sometimes you feel more than you can say. And that gap? It can be frustrating. But it can also be beautiful. Because it forces you to focus on what truly matters. Not perfect sentences, but honest ones. "I like talking with you," I said one day. Simple, basic, but real. And she smiled in a way that made everything feel worth it. That's when I realized something I hadn't considered before. Maybe English wasn't just a skill I needed to survive in America. Maybe it was becoming something else.
A bridge.
A bridge between who I was and who I was becoming. Between where I came from and where I was going. Between two people trying to understand each other in the simplest way possible. And that bridge? It was getting stronger every day. But life doesn't let things stay simple for too long. Because just when you start feeling comfortable, just when things begin to make sense, reality finds a way to test you. And what started as something light, something natural, was about to face something heavier, something real, something that would push both of us in ways we didn't expect. Because love that begins in simplicity doesn't stay simple forever. Real life became my teacher. Imagine trying to learn a language without sitting in a classroom, without memorizing long vocabulary lists, without even feeling like you're studying. Sounds impossible, right? That's exactly what started happening to me. Not because I planned it, but because life didn't give me another option. By the time we were seeing each other more often, something had already shifted inside me. I wasn't hiding behind silence anymore. I wasn't waiting to feel ready. I was participating. Not perfectly, but consistently. And that consistency? It changed everything. We didn't sit down and say, "Let's practice English." We just lived. And somehow, that became the best teacher I never signed up for. We went grocery shopping together again, but this time, it wasn't stressful. It was interactive. She would pick something up and ask, "Do you usually eat this?" And I would answer, sometimes slowly, sometimes searching for words. "I used to eat this a lot," I'd say. Or, "In my country, we cook it different." Not perfect grammar, but meaningful communication. And every time I spoke, something important happened in my brain. It got faster, more flexible, more confident. There's a concept in neuroscience called contextual learning. It means your brain learns better when information is tied to real situations instead of abstract memorization. When you learn a word while using it in real life, your brain attaches it to an experience, not just a definition. That's why I started remembering things without trying. Words like receipt, aisle, refund, I didn't memorize them. I lived them. We cooked together sometimes. And let me tell you, cooking is one of the most underrated ways to learn a language. Because everything is physical, visual, immediate. Cut this. Boil water. Add a little more salt. Short sentences. Clear actions. Instant understanding. No pressure. And here's the interesting part. When you understand through action, your brain doesn't panic. It doesn't feel like a test. It feels like participation. And participation builds confidence faster than perfection ever could. I started noticing small improvements. I didn't freeze as much. I didn't overthink every sentence. I even started making jokes, simple ones, but still. And when she laughed, that feeling, it stayed with me. Because humor is one of the hardest things to express in another language. It requires timing, culture, understanding. So when it works even a little, it tells your brain, you're not just surviving, you're connecting. And connection? That's the real goal. Not perfect English. Not advanced vocabulary. Just being understood. There were still challenges, of course. Real life doesn't suddenly become easy just because you're improving. There were moments when I misunderstood something completely. Times when she had to repeat herself. Moments where conversations slowed down, not because we wanted them to, but because they had to. But instead of feeling embarrassed, I started feeling curious. What did you say? Can you say it slower? What does that mean? Simple questions, but powerful ones. Because asking questions is a sign of engagement, not weakness. That's something I wish I understood earlier. Most learners think they need to understand everything before they speak. But real communication works the opposite way. You speak, you ask, you adjust. Over and over. That's how fluency grows. Not in silence, but in interaction. There's also something else that changed during this time. My relationship with mistakes. Before, mistakes felt like proof that I wasn't good enough. Now, they felt like part of the process. Almost necessary. Because every mistake showed me exactly what I needed to improve. And more importantly, it showed me that nothing bad actually happened when I made one. No one laughed. No one judged. Life just continued. That's when I realized something that sounds simple, but took me a long time to truly understand. Most people are not thinking about your English. They're thinking about their own lives, their own problems, their own thoughts. You're not the center of their judgment. You're just part of their moment. And once that idea settles in your mind, it frees you. It allows you to speak without that constant pressure. And when pressure goes down, performance goes up. That's not motivation. That's psychology. I also started picking up patterns naturally. How people express opinions. How they react in conversations. How tone changes meaning. Things you can't fully learn from books. Because language isn't just words. It's rhythm, energy, emotion. And you only learn that by being around it. Living it. One day, I noticed something unexpected. I was thinking in English. Not all the time. Not perfectly. But it happened. A small thought. A simple sentence in my mind.
And I paused.
Because that had never happened before. That's when I knew something real was changing. Not on the surface, but deeper. Because when your brain starts thinking in a new language, it means it's no longer translating everything. It's adapting, rewiring, building new pathways. And that doesn't happen through pressure. It happens through repetition and exposure. Through real life. But here's where things started to get more complicated. Because while my English was improving and our connection was growing, life outside of those moments was still very real. Work stress, financial pressure, cultural differences that didn't just disappear. And when real life gets heavier, relationships get tested. Not in obvious ways, but in subtle ones. Misunderstandings, different expectations, small frustrations that slowly build. And when you're still learning how to express yourself clearly in another language, those small issues can feel bigger than they actually are. Because sometimes you don't just struggle to solve the problem, you struggle to explain it. And that creates a different kind of tension. The kind that doesn't explode, but sits quietly, waiting, growing. Looking back, those simple days, shopping, cooking, talking, they were building something strong. But strength doesn't mean you won't be tested. It just means you have something to hold on to when things get difficult. And things were about to get difficult. Because real life doesn't stay in the comfortable zone for long. And the next phase of the story, it wasn't about learning new words. It was about learning how to face challenges together, in a language that still wasn't perfect, but was becoming ours. Love faced cultural gaps. Two people can understand each other's words and still misunderstand everything else. That's the part no one prepares you for. When our conversations became easier, I thought the hardest part was over. My English was improving. We were spending more time together. Things felt natural, even comfortable. But comfort has a way of revealing deeper differences. Not in language, in culture. And culture is something you don't notice at first because it feels normal to you. Invisible, like air. You don't think about it until something disrupts it. That disruption started small, almost unnoticeable. One evening, we were having dinner. Nothing special. Just a simple meal after a long day. We were talking about work, about random things when suddenly the mood shifted. Not dramatically. Just slightly off. I said something. I don't even remember the exact sentence now, but I remember her reaction. She became quiet. Not angry. Not upset in an obvious way. Just distant. And that confused me. Because in my mind, the conversation was normal. So I did what I had learned to do. I asked, "Did I say something wrong?" She hesitated. And then she said something that stayed with me. "It's not what you said, it's how you said it." That sentence hit harder than I expected. Because I understood the words. But I didn't understand the meaning. How can something be wrong if the words are correct? That's when I started realizing something deeper about communication in a different culture. It's not just about vocabulary. It's about tone, timing, expectation. In the U.S., people often communicate more directly, but at the same time, there's a subtle layer of emotional awareness. Certain tones can feel too strong. Certain words can sound too blunt. Back where I came from, being direct was normal. Honest. Efficient. You say what you mean and that's it. But here, the same sentence could carry a different feeling.
And I didn't see it at first.
There's a concept in cross-cultural psychology called high context versus low context communication. Some cultures rely heavily on direct words. Others rely more on tone, implication, and emotional nuance. And when those styles collide, misunderstandings happen. Not because anyone is wrong, but because each person is operating on a different communication system. That's exactly what was happening to us. I wasn't trying to be insensitive. She wasn't trying to overreact. We were just different. And those differences started showing up more often. Small moments. Little misunderstandings. Nothing big enough to break anything, but enough to create tension. Like when I stayed quiet during conversation, thinking I was being respectful, while she interpreted it as disinterest. Or when she asked, "How was your day?" and I gave a short answer, thinking it was enough, while she was expecting something deeper, more expressive. Same words, different expectations. And here's the tricky part. When you're already speaking in a language that isn't your first, you don't just deal with meaning. You deal with interpretation. You start questioning everything. Did I say it wrong? Did I sound rude? Did I miss something? And that constant questioning?
It's exhausting.
Because now you're not just translating language. You're translating emotion. And emotion is much harder to translate. There were moments when I felt frustrated. Not at her. At myself. Because I wanted to express something clearly but couldn't find the right way. I wanted to explain how I felt, but the words didn't feel strong enough. Or worse, they felt wrong. And that gap between feeling and expression? It creates distance, even between people who care about each other. But here's where things could have gone in two directions. We could have slowly drifted apart. Misunderstanding after misunderstanding. Or we could learn, adapt,
Grow.
and growth. It doesn't come from avoiding problems. It comes from facing them. One conversation changed everything. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. We sat down, no distractions, no rush, and talked.
Slowly. Carefully.
I told her, sometimes I don't know how to say things the right way. Not dramatic. Just real. And she said something I didn't expect. I know. And sometimes I don't understand how you mean things either. That moment, it removed something heavy. The idea that one of us was right and the other was wrong. Instead, it became clear. We were both learning, just in different ways. That's when something shifted again. We stopped expecting perfect communication and started focusing on understanding. That sounds simple, but it changes everything. Because when your goal is to understand, not to be right, you listen differently. You become more patient, more curious, less defensive, and that creates space. Space for mistakes, space for growth, space for connection. We began asking more questions. What do you mean by that? Can you explain it another way? Did I understand you correctly? Not as a test, but as a bridge. And slowly, those cultural gaps became smaller, not because they disappeared, but because we learned how to navigate them together. There's something powerful about building a relationship across differences. It forces you to be more aware, more intentional, more present, because nothing is automatic. Everything is chosen. And that kind of connection, it's stronger than one built on ease alone. But let's be honest. Growth doesn't remove challenges. It just prepares you for bigger ones. Because just when we started understanding each other better, life introduced a new kind of pressure. Not about words, not about culture, but about reality, responsibilities, expectations. The kind of things that test not just how you communicate, but how you stand together when things feel heavy. And this time, it wasn't something we could solve with a conversation alone. Because when real life gets involved, everything becomes more complicated. And what we built so far, it was about to be tested in a way we didn't see coming. When everything felt heavy again, there's a moment in every story where things stop feeling like progress and start feeling like pressure. Not loud, not dramatic. Just heavy. That's where we found ourselves. Up until that point, everything had been growing. My English, our connection, my confidence.
Slowly, yes.
Imperfectly, definitely. But still forward. And then real life stepped in. Not all at once. Just enough to change the weight of everything. Work became more demanding. Hours felt longer. Energy felt shorter. And when your body is tired, your mind doesn't perform the same way. Simple conversations start to feel like effort again. Words don't come as easily. Patience becomes thinner. That's not weakness. That's biology. Your brain has limited energy. And when most of it is used for survival, work, stress, responsibility, there's less left for learning, for connection, for emotional control. I didn't understand that at first. I just thought I was going backwards. There were days I came home and didn't want to speak at all. Not because I didn't care, but because I had nothing left. And silence started to come back. Not the same silence as before, the fearful one. This one was tired, heavy, quiet in a different way. And that quiet began to affect us. Small things became harder. Simple conversations turned into short answers. Moments that used to feel easy now required effort. And effort, when you're exhausted, feels like too much. There was one night I remember clearly. We were sitting in the same room, but it didn't feel like we were together. She asked, "Are you okay?" Simple question. But I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling. Not fully. Not clearly. "I'm just tired," I said. And it was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. Because underneath that tiredness was something else. Pressure. The kind you don't always talk about. Financial pressure. Trying to keep up with life in the U.S., where everything feels fast, structured, expensive. You don't just work. You plan. You calculate. You worry about the future. And when you're building a life from the beginning, that pressure feels constant. At the same time, there was emotional pressure too. Expectations, spoken and unspoken. In relationships, especially across cultures, expectations don't always look the same. What feels normal to one person might feel distant or confusing to another. And when you're both under stress, those differences become louder. Not in arguments, but in distance. There were moments when we misunderstood each other again. Not because we didn't care, but because we were both carrying too much. And here's the truth that hit me during that time. Love doesn't remove pressure. Life adds to it. And if you don't know how to manage that pressure, it slowly affects everything. There's a psychological idea called emotional bandwidth. It means your ability to handle stress, communicate clearly, and stay connected depends on how much mental and emotional energy you have. When that bandwidth is low, you become reactive, quiet, distant, not because you want to be, but because you don't have space to do more. That's exactly what was happening to me. And for a moment, I thought I was losing everything I had built. Not just my progress in English, but the connection, the direction, the version of myself I had started becoming. And here's the dangerous part. When you feel like you're losing progress, your brain starts looking for escape again. Just like before. What's the point? Maybe this is too hard. Maybe I'm not meant for this. Those thoughts came back. Quietly, but clearly. And this time they felt more real. Because now it wasn't just about me. It was about us. It was about a relationship that mattered. A life that was becoming real. And the fear of losing that? It's heavier than any fear of making mistakes in English. There was a moment I didn't say it out loud, but I felt it. I can't do this anymore.
Not in a dramatic way.
Just tired. Mentally. Emotionally.
Completely.
And when you reach that point, you don't need motivation. You need something deeper.
Clarity.
Understanding. A different way of seeing things. Because pushing harder doesn't work when you're already exhausted. That's something many people get wrong. They think success comes from doing more. But sometimes, growth comes from thinking differently. And that shift, it didn't happen immediately. It came from something small. Again, not a big solution. Not a perfect plan. Just a moment of honesty. With myself, I started asking a different question. Not, why is this so hard? But, what am I doing that makes this harder than it needs to be? That question changed everything. Because instead of blaming the situation, I started looking at my approach. how I was thinking, how I was reacting, how I was carrying everything inside my head. And I realized something uncomfortable. I was trying to be perfect again. Perfect at work. Perfect in communication. Perfect in the relationship. Perfect in learning English. And that pressure? It was self-created. No one asked me to be perfect. I just believed I had to be. And once you believe that, everything feels heavy, because perfection is impossible. And chasing it drains you. That realization didn't fix everything overnight, but it created space. Space to breathe. Space to rethink. Space to change. And slowly something began to shift again. Not outside. Inside. Because real change doesn't always come from changing your situation. Sometimes it comes from changing how you see it.
And that shift?
It was the beginning of something new. Not easier, but clearer. And clarity? It gives you strength in a different way. Because now, instead of trying to control everything, I started focusing on what actually mattered. And that changed the direction again. But this time, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about understanding. And that understanding was about to lead me to the biggest turning point so far. Not in language. Not in love, but in the way I saw my entire life. The turning point, small steps, big change. Sometimes, the most powerful transformations happen in silence. Not with a loud announcement, a sudden breakthrough, or a dramatic event, but with a series of small, almost invisible steps. That's exactly what happened to me. After weeks of feeling heavy, exhausted, and unsure, I realized that the only way forward wasn't to force perfection or rush progress. It was to focus on consistent, tiny actions that added up over time. I started by looking at my daily habits. Not my big goals, not I will speak perfect English today, but simple routines that felt achievable. Morning coffee? I would take 5 extra minutes to read a short English article, not for homework, but because I wanted to. Lunch break at work? I started making small conversation with colleagues, even just asking, "How's your day?" without worrying if I sounded perfect. And in the evenings, instead of retreating into silence or scrolling endlessly on my phone, I wrote down one thought or one small reflection in English. That small reflection exercise seemed almost pointless at first. But every night, as I wrote a few sentences, I began noticing patterns in my own thoughts. I could see where I struggled with words, where I hesitated, where I repeated the same mistakes. And more importantly, I noticed progress. Not in a flashy way, but subtle, steady improvement. Sentences started forming more naturally. Words that previously took effort now came with less hesitation. Confidence didn't flood me all at once, but it began to build quietly, like the tide rising without notice. At the same time, I approached my relationship differently. Instead of focusing on misunderstandings or cultural differences as problems, I reframed them as learning opportunities. A small miscommunication about chores? Instead of frustration, I asked a clarifying question. A minor misunderstanding in tone or phrasing. I stopped assuming the worst and paused to understand the intention. And gradually something shifted, not only in how we communicated, but in how we felt together. Patience replaced tension. Curiosity replaced judgment. And understanding replaced uncertainty. It was in those small interactions, where English wasn't perfect but intention was clear, that real connection flourished. There's science behind this too. Studies in social psychology show that when people perceive effort and sincerity, it builds trust even if communication is imperfect. In other words, meaning matters more than grammar, effort matters more than fluency. And I was finally experiencing that firsthand. One day, I noticed something that startled me. I had a conversation entirely in English with a coworker, and it felt natural. No translation in my head. No conscious effort to construct sentences. Just speaking. Thoughts flowed in English first, then out my mouth. My brain, after months of small, consistent engagement, had started rewiring itself. The result wasn't just language proficiency. It was freedom. Freedom to express, to connect, to participate without hesitation. That shift carried over into my relationship as well. Small discussions about weekend plans, cooking, or even personal frustrations no longer felt heavy. We were not only understanding each other's words, we were understanding each other's intentions. And that understanding built a new kind of intimacy, the kind that doesn't rely on perfect communication but on consistent effort and empathy. But the turning point wasn't just internal, it manifested in actions. I volunteered to lead a small project at work that required presenting in English. A few months earlier, the thought would have terrified me. Now, it was challenging, yes, but achievable. I prepared, I practiced, and I spoke. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but clearly, confidently, effectively. And when the project succeeded, something shifted inside me. I realized that language wasn't just a skill. It was a tool for life. The same tool that allowed me to navigate love, work, and personal growth. And here's the subtle but crucial lesson. Progress is never about one big leap. It's about cumulative momentum. A conversation at a grocery store. A sentence written in a journal. A question asked in the office. Each small action stacked upon the previous ones. And over time, those stacks built a foundation solid enough to support real change. Looking back, I could see how easily I could have given up. How tempting it was to retreat into silence, into the comfort of not speaking, not risking mistakes, not feeling inadequate. But the tiny, intentional steps created evidence for my brain. Evidence that effort leads to results. Evidence that communication, real communication, works even when imperfect. Evidence that I could grow in ways I never imagined. The most important change, though, was mental. I began to internalize a new belief that I didn't have to be perfect to be worthy, to be understood, or to succeed. That belief rippled through every part of my life. I started to speak up more. I started to take risks. I started to notice opportunities instead of obstacles. And the fear that once held me back, the fear of judgment, of making mistakes, of failing, lost its grip. Of course, life was still real. Problems still appeared. Work stress, cultural differences, financial pressure, they didn't disappear. But I approached them differently. Not as threats. Not as reasons to retreat. But as challenges I could face one step at a time, with English as a bridge, not a barrier. One night, while reflecting on the months that had passed, I realized something profound. The same patience, consistency, and effort I applied to learning English and navigating culture could be applied to love, to relationships, to life itself. The principles were universal. Small steps, sincere effort, curiosity, and presence, they work everywhere. And that realization gave me hope. Not hope for perfection. Not hope for a flawless life. But hope for resilience, for connection, for growth. And when hope is real, even the hardest challenges begin to feel manageable. So here's what I want you to take away from this part of my journey. Don't wait for perfect conditions. Don't wait for perfect English, perfect understanding, or perfect timing. Take small, consistent steps. Engage sincerely. Embrace mistakes as evidence of progress. And trust that your effort, however small, is building something meaningful, something lasting, and something transformative. That turning point, subtle as it was, set the stage for what came next. Facing life's pressures not with fear, but with clarity, courage, and connection. And that was just the beginning. Facing challenges together. After months of small, steady progress, I realized that life wasn't about avoiding challenges. It was about facing them together. Not just in my personal growth or English learning, but in every aspect of our lives. And in a relationship, especially one crossing cultures and languages, challenges don't come neatly packaged. They sneak in, testing patience, understanding, and trust. One weekend, we decided to move forward with something neither of us had tried before, planning a small trip together, fully independent. Just the two of us navigating a new city in the U.S., without relying on friends or guides. Sounds simple, right? But in reality, it was a perfect storm of potential misunderstandings. Maps, reservations, directions, ordering food, and unexpected schedule changes, all in English, in real time. In a culture slightly different from what I had grown used to. At first, everything felt chaotic. I would read signs incorrectly or misinterpret her suggestions. She would try to explain things, sometimes using slang or phrases I hadn't fully learned yet. Each small miscommunication piled up into frustration. A minor misunderstanding about where to eat became a 20-minute detour because we couldn't clarify directions quickly enough. I remember thinking, is this really going to work? Are we just going to argue the whole day? But then something clicked. Instead of letting frustration take over, we paused. We stopped trying to win the conversation or prove who was right. We began asking each other, slowly, deliberately, to clarify. Can you show me on the map again? Do you mean turn left here? Let's just walk for 5 minutes and see. That simple adjustment completely shifted the dynamic. What could have been tension turned into teamwork. And it wasn't just about navigation or language, it was about patience, empathy, and understanding. Realizing that mistakes weren't failures, but opportunities to adapt, made the difference. I also noticed my English improving without consciously trying. Because every question, every clarification, every little discussion became practice. Real-life practice. Emotional, meaningful, and memorable. This is where learning language and navigating a relationship overlap perfectly. Both require presence. Both require listening actively, noticing subtle cues, responding appropriately. And both demand vulnerability. You have to admit you don't know. You have to ask, and you have to sometimes risk embarrassment. But that risk, when managed with care and intention, becomes the bridge to connection and growth. During that trip, one moment stood out. We were sitting in a small cafe, exhausted from walking, confused about the next destination, debating the menu. I tried to describe a local dish I wanted to try, but I fumbled the words. She laughed softly, not mockingly, but warmly. It's okay. I get what you mean. That sentence, so small, so simple, carried more weight than a perfect pronunciation ever could. I realized that the bridge we were building wasn't made of grammar or vocabulary. It was made of trust, patience, and shared experience. Real connection doesn't require flawless speech. It requires sincerity and consistent effort. Neuroscience supports this too. Emotional context strengthens memory and learning. That day, my brain remembered far more English phrases than any textbook ever could because each word was tied to a lived experience, a feeling, a laugh, a shared frustration. As the trip progressed, the minor miscommunications became less frequent. We anticipated each other's needs, noticed small patterns in how we thought and acted, and adjusted proactively. My confidence in English grew, but even more importantly, my confidence in myself grew. I was learning to navigate not only language, but life alongside another person in a meaningful, collaborative way. And here's something crucial. Every challenge we faced didn't just teach me English or cultural awareness. it taught me resilience. Life in the U.S., for anyone learning to adapt to a new environment, is full of subtle pressures, deadlines, social norms, financial management, professional expectations. Combine that with maintaining a meaningful romantic relationship, and suddenly you're juggling multiple stressors at once. That trip, small as it seemed, became a microcosm of everything we were learning to handle together. Another insight emerged. Sometimes, love and learning grow strongest when things feel hardest. Easy conversations, perfect days, smooth schedules, they're comfortable, but they don't teach patience or adaptability. It's the moments of uncertainty, confusion, or minor frustration that force growth. That's when real skills, linguistic, emotional, and relational, emerge. By the end of that weekend, something had shifted. We returned home tired but connected. Not because the trip went perfectly, but because we had faced obstacles together. And in the process, we discovered something profound. Challenges aren't threats. They are opportunities. Opportunities to strengthen connection, to build trust, to practice patience, to grow. I started noticing changes in myself that surprised me. I could handle small misunderstandings without anxiety. I could speak more fluidly in English without translating everything in my head. I could approach problems in the relationship with curiosity rather than defensiveness. And the sense of empowerment, that feeling that I could navigate challenges without losing myself, was intoxicating. This also reinforced a bigger life lesson I had been slowly internalizing. Growth is rarely linear. Progress isn't smooth. It comes in waves, peaks, and valleys. Some days, language feels effortless. Other days, a single conversation feels exhausting. Some moments in a relationship feel natural and easy, others tense and confusing. But each moment matters because it contributes to cumulative growth. And that cumulative growth, when viewed in hindsight, creates momentum. The small steps, pausing to clarify directions, asking questions about English phrases, laughing at mistakes, trying again, compounded into confidence, competence, and deeper emotional connection. That momentum wasn't just about English or love. It was about life itself. By embracing challenges together, I realized that learning English, navigating culture, and building a meaningful relationship weren't separate struggles. They were interconnected paths, each reinforcing the other. Each conversation, each minor misunderstanding, each solution we discovered together strengthened the bridge between us and the bridge within me, from who I was to who I could become. And that realization brought hope. Hope that even in moments when life feels heavy, progress is still possible. Hope that mistakes aren't failures, they're lessons. Hope that when challenges arrive, facing them with patience, intention, and collaboration can lead to growth far beyond what I had imagined. In essence, that weekend wasn't just a trip. It was a turning point, a confirmation that small steps, consistency, vulnerability, and teamwork are far more powerful than perfect words or effortless understanding. That insight reshaped not only my English learning, but my perspective on love, life, and resilience. And from that day on, I approached every challenge, linguistic, emotional, cultural, not with fear or avoidance, but with curiosity and persistence. Because I had learned the secret. Challenges don't define you. How you face them together does. Building a future together. After facing challenges, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt, something remarkable happened. Life didn't suddenly become effortless. Our days weren't magically free from stress. But a subtle shift occurred, a deeper understanding of ourselves, each other, and the life we were building together. And in that understanding, we discovered the power of intentional action, small consistent habits, and shared vision. I started noticing that our relationship wasn't just about communication anymore. It was about collaboration. Not collaboration in the sense of completing tasks, but collaboration in building a life that felt meaningful. We talked openly about dreams, fears, and even the smallest routines we wanted to establish. For instance, Saturday mornings became our ritual. Making breakfast together, walking in the park, or just sitting on the balcony talking about everything and nothing. Simple, right? But these moments became anchors, grounding us in shared experience and reinforcing our connection. And the beauty of these moments? They naturally reinforce my English. We didn't sit down with grammar exercises or vocabulary lists. Instead, our language practice came organically through interaction. I asked questions, explained ideas, described feelings, and listened actively. Each conversation was a living lesson in contextual English, cultural nuances, and emotional intelligence. Psychology tells us that learning embedded in meaningful, emotional experiences is more memorable than rote memorization. And I was experiencing that in real time. Beyond language, these shared rituals taught me another critical lesson: long-term success in life, love, and personal growth isn't about perfection. It's about alignment and consistency. It's about aligning actions with values, words with intention, and routines with purpose. By cultivating simple habits together, we were creating a framework for a future that didn't rely on luck, but on shared effort. Of course, challenges didn't vanish. There were moments when work deadlines collided with personal plans, when cultural misunderstandings flared up briefly, or when exhaustion tested patience. But our approach had changed. Instead of seeing these moments as crises, we approached them as opportunities for problem-solving and mutual support. Small phrases like, "Let's figure this out together," or "How can we adjust?" became common refrains. They reinforced trust, collaboration, and emotional resilience, qualities far more enduring than fluency or grammar. Another turning point was when we began thinking about our long-term vision. Not just surviving day to day, but actively creating a life together. We discussed careers, finances, travel dreams, family, and even how we would raise children. These conversations were initially daunting because expressing aspirations across cultural and linguistic differences felt challenging. But the more we shared, the more natural it became. And the more natural it became, the more confident I became, not just in English, but in myself. During this period, I also noticed the ripple effects of progress in one area spilling into others. My English was improving, which allowed me to communicate more clearly at work. That clarity reduced stress, which improved my energy for the relationship. Better communication in the relationship increased mutual understanding, which created a more supportive environment to pursue personal goals. It was a virtuous cycle, proof that growth in one domain can catalyze growth in others when approached with intentionality. And then came the moment I had been waiting for quietly, a breakthrough in understanding and expression. One evening, we were planning a future trip, discussing potential locations, activities, and the kind of experience we wanted to create together. I realized that I was speaking almost entirely in English. Not rehearsed, not careful, just spontaneous, confident expression. I could express preferences, ask nuanced questions, and discuss logistics smoothly. The language was no longer a barrier. It was a bridge. That moment wasn't just about English. It symbolized everything I had been learning: patience, persistence, resilience, vulnerability, and the power of small steps. Each mistake, each hesitation, each minor miscommunication had been a brick in the foundation that allowed me to reach this point. And the most surprising part? It felt natural, not forced, not stressful, just real life flowing forward. We also began reflecting on our shared journey. Looking back, it was clear that the struggles had been formative. The cultural differences, the miscommunications, the moments of doubt, they had taught me more about empathy, adaptation, and emotional intelligence than any textbook ever could. And those lessons weren't just theoretical. They were living skills, shaping how I approached work, friendships, and even self-reflection. By this point, I realized something important for anyone struggling with language learning or adaptation in a new country. Growth is never about perfection. It's about engagement, about participation, about showing up consistently, even when progress feels invisible. The brain responds to meaningful, emotionally charged interactions. Your confidence grows not when you avoid mistakes, but when you navigate them constructively. And your relationships deepen not when everything is smooth, but when you persist through challenges together. And so, our life started to take shape in a way that felt intentional and sustainable. We were no longer reacting to life. We were participating actively in creating it. Our routines, habits, and shared goals became scaffolding for a life that balanced growth, love, and joy. We celebrated small wins, mastering a tricky English phrase, resolving a minor misunderstanding, successfully planning a weekend together. Those wins were evidence that consistent effort, patience, and intentionality create momentum that compounds over time. Even more surprisingly, these habits and frameworks began influencing our broader social life. Friends noticed a change in how we communicated, not just with each other, but in group settings. I was more confident, expressive, and engaged. Conversations flowed more naturally. Humor, storytelling, and nuance were accessible in ways they hadn't been before. And the deeper I became involved in authentic communication, the more my social and professional life also benefited. By the end of this chapter in my life, I understood that love, life, and learning are deeply interconnected. Each requires patience, vulnerability, consistent effort, and the courage to face challenges directly. Language is not merely a tool, it's a mirror of your emotional state and engagement with the world. And mastery, whether of English, culture, or relationships, doesn't come from speed or perfection, but from persistence, reflection, and willingness to learn. And that brings me to the most important lesson I want viewers to take away. Life will surprise you. Not always in the ways you expect. Sometimes the surprises come wrapped in challenges, miscommunications, or exhausting moments. But if you approach life intentionally, embrace small steps, and stay persistent, those surprises can lead to growth, connection, and a future you never imagined. Our story wasn't perfect. Our English wasn't perfect. Our understanding of culture wasn't perfect. But together, through consistent effort, empathy, and shared intention, we built a life that worked. And in that life, the tools I developed, the ability to communicate, adapt, and grow, became far more valuable than I had imagined at the start. It was no longer about just learning English. It was about learning to navigate life, love, and challenges together. And that realization changed everything. Life surprised me. A happy ending. By the time we reached this point in our journey, everything felt different. Not because life had become easy, but because we had grown into the challenges. Our love, our communication, and even my English had evolved in ways that felt natural, steady, and resilient. The small steps, persistent effort, and shared experiences had accumulated into something much bigger, a life that felt intentional, joyful, and full of possibility. Looking back, I can see how much we've both changed. The early days, when every conversation felt like a test, every misunderstanding threatened distance, and every cultural difference felt like a wall, seem distant now. But those moments were crucial. They were the foundation for understanding, patience, and resilience. They taught me that growth isn't a straight line. It's messy, slow, and sometimes painful, but always meaningful. One of the most surprising things I discovered is how life rewards perseverance in unexpected ways. I never imagined that struggling to express a single idea in English could lead to a deeper connection, a stronger relationship, and a sense of confidence that permeates every aspect of life. But that's exactly what happened. Every challenge I faced, linguistic, cultural, or emotional, was actually preparing me for the next stage of growth. And when you look back, the surprises aren't scary, they're gifts. We celebrated small victories together. The first time I managed an entire conversation in English without pausing to translate in my head, she cheered with genuine excitement. The first weekend we planned perfectly together, navigating a city independently, felt like a triumph. Even simple achievements, like cooking a meal together or resolving a minor disagreement calmly, carried a sense of accomplishment that reinforced our bond. These moments weren't grand. They were ordinary, but ordinary life, when approached intentionally, becomes extraordinary. And in the background of all this, my English continued to improve. Not through textbooks or drills alone, but through life. Conversation became practice, laughter became learning, and mistakes became lessons. By connecting language learning with lived experience, I realized that English wasn't just a skill, it was a bridge. A bridge to understanding culture, building relationships, and expressing my true self. Our relationship reached a level of trust and intimacy I hadn't thought possible in the early days. Cultural gaps no longer felt like obstacles, but opportunities for growth. Miscommunications became teachable moments. And even when new challenges appeared, we faced them together with a shared mindset, curiosity, patience, and collaboration over perfection or blame. That mindset transformed everything. It wasn't always smooth, of course. Life still throws unexpected pressures, work deadlines, personal challenges, family responsibilities. But we had developed tools to navigate them. We had learned to pause, reflect, and communicate, to ask questions when uncertain, to listen deeply, and to respond with empathy. These skills didn't just fix problems, they strengthened our foundation for the future. There's a psychological principle called growth mindset, popularized by Carol Dweck. It suggests that people who see challenges as opportunities to learn, not threats to their competence, develop resilience and long-term success. Looking back, I realize we both adopted this mindset, consciously or unconsciously. Each challenge, each misunderstanding, each small triumph reinforced the belief that we could grow together and individually, no matter what life threw at us. And then, slowly, life began to feel lighter. Conversations flowed naturally. Laughter became easy. Planning, organizing, and decision-making became collaborative rather than stressful. Even the little things, choosing a restaurant, grocery shopping, handling daily routines, felt like shared victories. The weight that had been so heavy months earlier now felt manageable. It didn't disappear. It transformed into stability, confidence, and joy. I also noticed that the surprises life offered were no longer frightening. They were exciting. Every unexpected twist became a chance to learn something new, experience something different, or strengthen our connection. Life, I realized, is full of surprises. Some are challenges, some are joys, but all are opportunities to practice resilience, patience, and love. And as our life together settled into a rhythm of intention and growth, I began to reflect on the journey itself. From the early struggles of expressing myself in English, navigating cultural differences, and facing real-life pressures, to the gradual accumulation of small, consistent actions, the story had a clear pattern. Persistence, empathy, and curiosity always pay off. Not immediately, not in a dramatic flash, but steadily, inevitably, in ways that shape your life for the better. By now, we were not just surviving in the U.S., we were thriving. Our home felt like a sanctuary. Our routines became rituals, and our love had matured into a partnership based on respect, trust, and shared growth. And through it all, my English was no longer a hurdle. It was a tool. A tool that allowed me to communicate, connect, and navigate life with confidence. I want to leave you with this insight. Life's surprises, the difficult moments, and the unexpected challenges. They are not there to stop you. They are there to teach you, strengthen you, and ultimately bring you to places you never imagined. The path may be slow. The steps may be small. But every effort counts. Every mistake is a lesson. Every challenge is a chance to grow. And as I look at my life now, I realize something beautiful. The story of struggle, growth, and unexpected joy is universal. It doesn't matter where you come from, what language you speak, or what cultural differences you face. The principles remain the same. Persistence, empathy, curiosity, and small consistent actions create transformation. Life surprised me, not by giving me instant perfection or effortless success, but by showing me that resilience, patience, and intentional effort build a life full of connection, love, and fulfillment. And that's the most important lesson I want to share with you. The surprises life gives can be the most extraordinary gifts if you face them with courage, heart, and consistency. And so here we are. Life is still full of unexpected turns. Challenges will arise. Misunderstandings may happen. But now, I face them with confidence, love, and a clear sense of purpose. I know that I can grow, adapt, and thrive together with the people I care about. And that's the message I want every viewer to take away from my story. Life can surprise you in ways that challenge you, teach you, and ultimately lead to happiness and fulfillment you never imagined. The journey continues, but the foundation is solid. Life has taught me that patience, persistence, empathy, and curiosity are the keys to navigating both English and love. And that no matter how heavy things feel at times, growth, connection, and joy are always possible. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it through challenges, mistakes, and moments that feel too heavy to handle. What if the next twist in your story could teach you more than any success ever could? On this channel, we dive deep into real-life stories, slow and simple English, and practical lessons that help you grow, communicate, and live boldly right here in the U.S. Don't just watch, experience, learn, and be inspired with every story. If you're ready to turn life's surprises into your greatest lessons, hit subscribe now and join our community. Every week, we bring you real English stories, cultural insights, and strategies to improve your listening, reading, and speaking slowly, clearly, and powerfully. Your next breakthrough could be just one story away. Comment below what life surprise taught you the most. Let's share, learn, and grow together. Subscribe to never miss a real-life story that inspires your growth and transforms your English journey.